Proposition 5 is about local bond approval requirements. It's a constitutional amendment placed on the ballot by the state legislature. What it asks is, do you want to lower the supermajority from 2/3 to 55% for some local bonds and local taxes? A typical California home costs twice the national average, and renters in California pay about 50% more than in other states. Some local government programs help low-income Californians afford housing, including people with disabilities and those at risk of chronic homelessness. Local governments usually use local bonds to fund major projects like housing assistance as well as local infrastructure. Bond financing is a type of long-term borrowing that the local government uses to sell bonds to investors and then repays those investors with interest over several years. So instead of paying for the project all at once, cost is spread over the current as well as future taxpayers, all who will benefit from the investment over many years. Since the 1970s, adoption of Prop 13 has required a 2/3 approval to pass some local bonds, particularly those increasing property taxes. If Prop 5 receives a 50% approval of voters, the state constitution would be amended to lower the vote requirement from 66.66% to 55% for cities and counties to issue bonds or impose special taxes for public infrastructure projects and for affordable housing. It would require independent audits and establish a citizens oversight committee to ensure revenue is being used only for affordable housing and infrastructure and not for administrative costs above 5%, including salaries and operating expenses. Any entity that's owned or led by any member of the local governing board that voted to place a bond on the ballot would be prohibited from bidding on any Prop 5 funded work. Prop 5 would apply to future bonds and any bonds that are on the November 2024 ballot, including a $20 billion affordable housing bond in the Bay Area. According to the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a nonpartisan state department, an additional 20 to 50% of local bond measures would have passed if the voter approval requirement was 55%, which would have raised a couple billion dollars over many years. They also project an increase in funding available for housing assistance and infrastructure of a couple billion dollars over many years. They say that if local bonds are approved, local governments would likely cover the borrowing costs by raising property taxes. These are not the opinions of the League of Women Voters, but people who support Prop 5 say that allowing just 1/3 of the voters to overrule the wishes of the majority of voters is undemocratic and makes it way too hard for local governments to borrow money. They also say this would allow local officials to fund their own priorities more easily without having to rely as much on state or federal funding. Again, while not the opinion of the League, people who oppose Prop 5 say that when a local government borrows money, that tab almost always gets put on property taxes, and property owners make up a minority of the voters. As of August 24th, total contributions for Prop 5 were $5 million, and all of that money was from the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation. Total contributions against were $53 million, with the top contributors being $41 million from the California Association of Realtors, $10 million from the National Association of Realtors, and $1.7 million from the California Business Roundtable PAC. Campaign finance can change dramatically up until Election Day, though, so updates to campaign contributions can be seen on the cal-matters.org, ballotpedia.org, cal-access.sos.ca.gov, and the lao.ca.gov websites. The more money contributed to a campaign, the more ads you'll hear and see, whether for or against the issue. The least reliable information to base your vote on is any paid advertising, and the media in general requires some effort to determine what's opinion and what's fact. The most reliable sources for facts are the Cal Matters, Ballotpedia, Cal Access, and the LAO websites. So So what your vote means, a yes on Prop 5 means you want to make it easier for local governments to borrow by lowering the voting threshold from 66.66% to 55% for affordable housing and local infrastructure projects. A no on Prop 5 means you want the voting threshold to remain the same for local bonds and taxes.